Hello everyone, once again, welcome to the Loadout. The Loadout, excuse me. Presented by the Daily Dot, that's capital T, capital D, capital D. Easy for me to say, difficult for me to survive. The introduction. One more night of esports discussion, news, debate, and diatribes as Richard Lewis himself struggles with survival through his reaction to my own near-death attempt, or encounter.
Yeah, it's not. It's usually me that's dying at this time of the week. Mondays are a rough and brutal day, but seeing you suffer has cheered me up immensely.
That's why I did it, Richard. I nearly met my end just to improve your mood ever so slightly. So I'm glad I accomplished my goal. As you can see, Sir Richard Lewis is joining us to discuss all things good and fair and bright and wonderful and esports, which is kind of a a little bit hypocritical to say those words and then to say esports, but we're gonna make it work. We're gonna bring you the best of this industry that has to offer. I promise that. I promise it. I promise it from me to you. So, 2 hours, buckle up, as you will. Richard here now, our League of Legends show after Richard takes his leave. Richard, let us begin post haste before I nearly die again. I'd like to get started.
Yeah, let's start with something gentle.
Sure. Let's start with a player retiring, or reportedly going to retire after Worlds. A player that's been around for quite some time. You may have heard of the man Xpeke.
Yeah.
He of the Nexus issues, let's say. He of the mid lane, of the many years in League, of the original World Championship. He has reportedly decided to retire following this split and World Championship event. That's a good way to go out, I suppose. His team is looking pretty fair. He might be able to make a run to Worlds, depending on how things shake out for Origin. Let's just take a moment to reflect on Xpeke and really one of the last originals, quote-unquote, of the scene taking his leave.
Yeah, I mean, all good things come to an end, and what we've seen increasingly with League of Legends is that the kind of average lifespan of a pro player's career. I mean, if you consider that the game really has only been around 6 years in total since beta testing, but the LCS obviously even less than that. Certainly we're not at the stage yet where we're really talking about long careers. And a lot of people that came up with Xpeke are long since gone and have faded into obscurity. Now it's been incredible for him. Actually, he's walked away from one of the best organizations in the world. Did so following internal disputes around about the handling of players, principally Reckless, but also there was some other stuff going on. He forms his own brand, gets it all sponsored, gets money coming in, which is something that, as we've seen from other organizations, your MYMs of this world, a lot harder than it looks. And these were people that were meant to be experienced business heads. But somehow, Xpeke's managed it. For that, he should be commended. And right now, they're joint second in the league, of course, behind Fnatic, his old organization. I'd love to see him have one last hurrah. But equally, I can also understand why this is somebody that would certainly want to be retiring from playing. It's just going to be interesting to see what he does next, because there'll be opportunities for him. Xpeke is one of those good old boys that's very well liked in Europe. He still remains the most popular player just in terms of social media reach alone. If you add his Facebook and Twitter followers together. He will undoubtedly have an option to do something for Riot should he wish to do that. But it's got to be said as well that Xpeke, he likes to party, he likes to have lots of fun, and if he can find a way to sort of take a back seat, still enjoy that celebrity status in esports while making money and just focus solely on the partying without having to put in huge swathes of practice every day, I'm sure he will. And equally as well, if we look at guys like Snoopy, who've transitioned into working with gambling companies, and being the face, if you like, the sort of League of Legends face of the unicorn sports betting company. I imagine there'll be similar endorsement opportunities for Xpeke anyway. The good thing, of course, is with branding. This is a little bit of agent talk coming in. You want to go out on a high because you don't want to sully your own brand. And certainly, if as you rightly say, if he can make it to Worlds or whatever, that would be that would definitely be a good way to go out at the very top of your game.
Do you see him perhaps following the Ocelot model and trying to go like the way of team ownership?
Him. I mean, he might go down the Ocelot road, but it's got to be said he's never he's not an Ocelot type person. Like the difference between the two is, I think Ocelot was always so desperate to overrepresent his achievements, to overrepresent his stature, whereas Xpeke is actually relatively humble and downplays it, and that's sort of the difference between being number one, being the most popular, being out in front, being in the better teams, and wanting those things. So I don't think he'll go down the same road. I mean, if he does decide to sort of be some God Emperor for life of Origin, after all, it is his baby, I doubt it'll go the same way as that Gamers 2 has or whatever.
Right. So we could see a last draw from the pick I like too, myself. He's still, I think, a very capable mid laner. I do like the idea of a player going out while they're still, I don't know if on top is the correct thing, but still very capable of playing at a high level. This kind of gets into a brief topic I want to cover, the idea of the veteran in League. You mentioned that League has been around, even if you include the betas, for about 6 years now. Peke goes back to really the origins of competitive League, and Absolutely. Here he is bowing out for 6 years. What is it going to take? What changes do you think there would have to be? And this is broad, I know, but still, to have like a decade-long veteran career in the current esports scene, because that's a very common thing. It's often surpassed, in fact, in traditional sports. We don't see anything close to that in esports.
Well, actually,
for the most part,
yeah, for the most part, just to play a little bit of devil's advocatory. One of the good things about Counter-Strike is we are now starting to see that. We are now starting to see what happens to those older players. It's been around a lot longer. It's gone through multiple updates, and yet somehow we still have players from way back in the day. Now, of course, names that will immediately spring to mind will be two members of the Golden Five, one of the elite Counter-Strike teams of all time, of course, Taz and Neo, who continue to play together under the Virtus Pro banner to this day. These are players with over 10 years competitive experience now.
Forrest and Nothing as well. Forrest and Nothing.
Yeah, and I was going to say Nothing. Jordan definitely up there. So we are starting to now see what happens when you get into those upper echelons. Yes, you can argue they are freaks and oddities, but I think the argument that, when your reactions start to dull as you get a little bit older, as you approach 30, you can't be a serious competitive player anymore. I think nobody would disagree with the fact that you need a higher level of just raw reaction time in an FPS than you do over a MOBA. I think that's a fair argument to make, although maybe some people will disagree with that. But we're starting to see players who are approaching 30 be able to still play at the highest level. And therefore that shows that there are ways to channel your experience positively. I think the big issue is that League of Legends is such an intense game in the sense that it's almost overcomplicated a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong. Once somebody goes down that road and sets that ball rolling of overcomplication, everyone's got to go with it, or you get left behind. But for example, it's always difficult in a MOBA anyway because the game's patched, it's continually changing, it's continually evolving. But there's so many different sort of fluctuations in the meta, even when a patch isn't directly responsible for it, that it's almost as if people are just sort of trying to be, this champ was always good. We just never played it. And in fact, 3 months ago, we're saying it was garbage for no good reason. And now everyone has to play it. So then everybody has to come up with a counter. And people are putting in a ridiculous amount of time into League of Legends. I believe it was Neon Tonso just the other day said he doesn't know a pro that doesn't put like 10 hours a day into the game. Which is, that's beyond the level of most world-class elite athletes.
Right.
And there's probably an argument to say that that's overkill. What happens there is maybe that sort of intense regime probably encourages a little bit of burnout, like in a way that Counter-Strike doesn't. Like how, for example, can you be an LCS player putting 10 hours into the game every day? And of course, we all know that they like to reap the rewards. We all know about League of Honeys. We all know about the stuff that goes on in the parties and everything else that goes on behind the scenes. How can you have that sort of level of dedication, that sort of level of excess, and expect at the end of 3-4 years not to be absolutely wrecked? And of course, that's definitely a factor. That's not really there with Counter-Strike. They definitely practice less in most cases. They get to take time between tournaments. Let's not forget as well the fact that there's this open tour format in Counter-Strike helps. You can pick and choose your tournaments. You're not required to, you're not obligated to play if you don't want to.
Right.
There's lots going on with League that I think would lead to a shorter career time and encourage burnout in a faster in a faster period of time.
Right, and it makes sense because it's also comparable. League is the schedule and the way it works to StarCraft, for example, and we see the same thing in StarCraft. In StarCraft, you have veterans are of like 5 or 6 years pedigree. Those are the wily veterans who've been around a long time. Most players burn out in a few years just because the scene is so intense and it requires so many hours. There's no real breaks unless you get into the real off season, and even then, it's just that period of time you're off and then you're back on.
Yeah, and let's not forget as well. I mean, even the players that are still around. There's some players that 1-2 years ago were absolutely imperious, untouchable, and yet what they've struggled for is consistency as the game has changed, as the game has evolved. Now, some players aren't going to be able to adapt. Adaptability is a trait, after all. It's something that you need to be able to do. If you're not very good at adaptability and you only play within your comfort zone, when the game moves you out of that comfort zone and you start to suck, there's not really a lot you can do about that. That's just a limitation of yourself. But that said, ultimately, the true greats in any sport, they adapt and they overcome obstacles. Now, the players that we've seen repeatedly do this in League of Legends are few and far between. I mean, you've got absolute freaks and oddities that have remained at the top of their game for a ridiculous amount of time. Guys like Faker, for example. But on an individual basis, this doesn't really happen quite so much, and this is another factor as well. I mean, you can argue that it's a combination of things: the level of intense dedication that's required, the fact that the game is constantly evolving, constantly changing. There's so much to do. I mean, some people, I have no doubt, would argue that these players are perhaps being put in environments that they're ill-equipped to deal with. They go away to a gaming house. We all know how they can be. They're basically living they're living an adult life, but the adult life of an elite athlete, or without any of the support infrastructure that an elite athlete has.
Right.
So, and certainly not making anywhere near the amount of money that they should. So, yeah, there's lots to consider. I don't think it's necessarily a problem Riot can fix because Riot clearly have moved in a direction that precludes some of the things that would fix the problem. For example, having a regular season where you don't get to take some time off. I mean, you do, but it's only a little bit, and then generally people are traveling, doing promotional stuff, trying out new team members, trying out new strategies, adapting to new patches. Even the few weeks that players have between splits, it's not really used for recuperation and rest. It's generally used to get ready for the next season. So it's quite a grueling environment in that regard. Now, Riot moved away from the open tour system, which would fix a lot of that. Like, for example, Fnatic, after winning a major, they just said, we're not going to attend the next bunch of tournaments. Doesn't matter that they're effectively letting prize money slip through their fingers. They knew within themselves they needed a rest. They had the option to do that. That's one of the advantages. And I think that's probably why, you see players dip in and out of the scene in Counter-Strike. You see them retire or take prolonged breaks or sometimes just join teams that they know are never going to win just to recharge their batteries, have a bit of fun, learn to love the game again. None of these options are available to a League of Legends player and never will be. So ultimately, if the environment that Riot has fostered does lead to a little bit of burnout, and I'm not saying that it does. I think you need to do some sort of credible scientific study to prove that one way or the other. But if it does, then it's never going to be able to be fixed, and we're just going to have to get used to League of Legends pros having real short career spans. The light that burns twice as bright burns twice as fast.
Exactly. I do think it would help if we had more comfortable environments for the players that, I don't think the Copenhagen Wolves setup that we were shown by Young Buck necessarily helps with a 5-6 year career when you have a little twin bed next to your small desk, you're packed in like sardines. Give the player a room. I've seen the Cloud9 house looks much more comfortable than the Wolves house, but that's something that will hopefully improve over time and through the efforts of those who uncover those things and speak to them and the realities of it. Some of whom I know right here. But we shouldn't spend too much time on this subject because we have a lot to talk about today. One of the big things to talk about, of course, is the culmination of what months ago was the Super League story. It has now arrived, the ESL ESEA Pro League final. If you followed all of my acronyms and letters there that I was able to spew out without choking this time, I'm impressed with myself, actually. We saw the final this weekend. 4 teams from Europe, 4 from North America, the regions at least, not necessarily from the continents, in the case of Keyed Stars. And it was a very exciting event, very interesting to watch, a lot of fun to watch. We saw upsets the first day, and upsets really from there on. Proved perhaps some of the upsets we saw were not necessarily upsets, just a matter of a team coming out and kind of declaring themselves to be at the next level. I think Cloud9 fits that bill. They beat Envy the first day in a best of 1. We thought, okay, they upset them, that's good for them, but then they beat them twice in a row, ended up having 3 consecutive wins over Envy, proved themselves a better team, that weekend at least, pretty thoroughly. So we can say I think Cloud9 looked good. CLG, harder to say. Beating Fnatic, obviously great credit to them, but then getting stomped, beating Keyed Stars as well on LAN, but then getting stomped by Cloud9 in the semifinal. Perhaps it's the case of just Cloud9 being that strong. A lot of stuff to go through here, really. A lot of stuff to sort through because, for me, actually, it was fun. It reminded me of a pre-CGS tournament where you actually had teams from different continents trading wins and going through the standings. Here's a team from Europe and a team from America, a team from South America. It was a lot of fun to see that just happen again. It's been so long, so many years since we could see that kind of thing happening. I think the last time was probably CPL Winter Road 2006 for me.
In its purest sense, when the tournament was at its best, it was hugely exciting, hugely entertaining. I don't think we should necessarily gloss over some of the fundamental problems with the event, though.
Sure.
I had my doubts when they announced the event ESL and said that they were going to do it in their stadium or however they worded it. I've seen the environment that they were in. It was always going to be a challenge doing it in Cologne. There was absolutely no doubt about that, and I definitely had. I'd anticipated that some of these problems were going to arise, such as floor space. I think we can all say that in an era where CSGO has really made great leaps and bounds, and not just for the game itself, but also for esports as a whole. For example, the development of soundproof booths that actually work, but also allow the spectators to still feel engaged with their players. That's something League of Legends doesn't have. Yeah, it's something CSGO has slowly mastered and slowly refined. ESL didn't have these. There was no chance of them having it. It was simply impossible. There simply isn't the space. So logistically, it couldn't be done. Now, when I can hear players on a point of view stream literally say, I've just heard them call that they're going here, so let's all rotate. There's something fundamentally wrong with your tournament. At the point that becomes apparent, you should really be thinking, yeah, we've seriously dropped the ball here. And let's not forget, this was a tournament with, you've already given out $250,000. You're giving out another $250,000, and yet you can't even guarantee that the games are free from influence due to the proximity of the players. There were also as well instances of players being able to look at other people's screens to see if they were flashbanged or not, so they could provide information. Now, this ghosting in the past, if players were observed doing it, it always used to be the case that there was a disqualification or some form of penalty. Sometimes you forfeited rounds, depending on the tournament, really. Here, I think ESL was sort of so ashamed of how underprepared they were in terms of these basic fundamentals. They didn't want to go down that road, because if they went down that road, you're opening a real can of worms.
Right.
If you say to a player, right, well, we've sat you 5 meters away from someone else's screen and you're looking at it, so we're going to disqualify you or we're going to dock you rounds. They're going to be like, hang on a minute, we're sat practically on each other's laps here. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, they would have been drawing attention to the problems they created if they had actually implemented these rules.
Exactly. And I think that was why they avoided it. But ultimately, there is no doubt that we cannot say with any certainty that the proximity of the two teams, the sound issues and the monitor issues, didn't pervert the course of the tournament. And I think that's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. Not only that, I understand for logistical reasons why you do best of ones. I do understand that. I understand the time constraints. But aren't we moving to a time now where our industry leader can at least guarantee there aren't going to be time delays so we can have best of threes? You know, I've obviously done work for Gfinity, but they know this. I'll go in on them if they make a mistake. They'll still hire me to do their events anyway. I'm a freelance. I've got no allegiance to them. I could be as critical as anybody else. And the first two Gfinity events that I did for CS, the first one was absolutely atrocious from start to finish. They made so many mistakes. There were so many delays. People even got removed from the venue. They know how bad it was. The second one, they improved, but there was still chronic delays. The last one I went to, no delays whatsoever. Now that is a progression. If they felt comfortable doing best of threes on day one, and they're a young company, why can't ESL do it? And that again, definitely affects the outcome. Even CLG said, hey, we've made it to a semi-final and we've won 2 best of ones. That format's broken. That shouldn't be happening. So I think before we even get into what a great spectacle the tournament was, and indeed it was a spectacle, we need to say that moving forward, this cannot be how the ESL, ESEA Pro League works. It cannot be. And if it's like the same for the next season, something's really wrong. I think look, I know ESL, they'll have been a little bit embarrassed by this. For what's meant to be one of their flagship tournaments, proof that they can do this sort of thing, came together real fast in the aftermath of the Super League talks. But ultimately, that's... look, I've spoken to the pros that have been coming back, and they're super disappointed. That's before you even get into stuff like how hot it was. You've got a full... you've got a capacity venue with loads of computers blaring, players in there, adrenaline going. It's the hottest day on record in Germany in 10 years. And the players are too hot to play. They're absolutely roasting. And then you got bald guys like Crims who have to wear hats. Pity those guys, right? So yeah, the tournament left a lot to be desired, just in terms of its organizational and logistics stuff.
I think it's ironic actually that some of those issues could most affect the teams that are English speaking. Who had a lot to lose there. Actually, one of the things that was interesting to me was the idea of the POV views being made available. A team that's perhaps speaks in French or Swedish, naturally, could then go into a team that speaks English and their voice comms and look at their game and have a much better, more thorough understanding of how they're playing a map than they can have had to them.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jared, actually, because that is another, again, just poor logistical planning on the behalf of ESL. Now, again, if you're the industry leader and you know what I know, which is that if you're playing tomorrow and your opponents have played the previous day, generally you will go on to Twitch, you will get VODs, you will get demos if they're available.
You get better.
Yeah, even better. And now point-of-view streams as well, they absolutely cannot be released during... a tournament. You've got to put them behind some sort of wall or something after their broadcast. Even then, I mean, this is just another reason why I don't like the point-of-view streams. And it's really sad that we're letting the community, because, hey, we like it. We get to hear our favorite players. We're letting those people dictate the potential competitive integrity of a tournament. Right. That's ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you like them. They shouldn't be happening. And I'll get onto another issue with it in just a second. But the fact that, as you rightly say, they are released during a tournament, somebody can use them for intelligence purposes during an event, that's unreal. That's an unreal advantage. And that just shouldn't be happening. Now, the other problem, and I'm amazed this didn't blow up, actually, was Envious. Somebody translated their point of view stream during the Cloud9 game.
Right. Yeah.
And according to translations, there was some anti-Islamic sentiment coming out. They were saying, I believe it was Freakazoid was a dirty Arab.
Yes.
And he was doing Ramadan, and they were going to feed him some ham, which, of course, is all haram under the Quran. Now, the French, again, this is where I'm saying, this is where cultural understanding comes in. French have a very different approach to sectarianism and religious beliefs in their country compared to the rest of Europe, and certainly America, where it's a protected freedom. Now, this is a problem with the point of view stream. You will say things in the heat of the moment during a game that you absolutely do not mean, that does not reflect who you are as a person, but it slips out. Your adrenaline's going. You're wanting to win. You're wanting to crush your opponents. You're wanting to hype your teammates. And this is just another reason why they shouldn't be there. For example, let's just say Envious were sponsored by a company that had their headquarters in Saudi Arabia or something like that. All of a sudden, I'm pretty sure that sponsorship's gone tomorrow. That's before we even get into, you cannot gauge how the community is going to react. I'd wager if they were being racist rather than engaging in Islamophobia, then perhaps that goes a very different way in the public domain. And you can say, well, the players shouldn't say it, but ultimately those communications should be private. I did a video about this at the time when they were released. This is dangerous territory to be getting into. We're creating an extra layer of pressure for players. During a game, I shouldn't have to worry about what I'm saying to my teammates.
Right.
And we're now, if that had blown up, that's the first hurdle. You even heard Nothing during his point of view stream actually put a disclaimer at the start saying we don't dislike these guys, but we're going to trash talk them. Now, again, why does a player have to be cognizant of including a disclaimer for their own private communications in a competitive game? Point of view streams are great, but they're absolutely ridiculous in terms of what they do for the players, potentially how it can harm their careers, how it can harm organizations. And to do it for the mild titillation it gives, I'll never agree that this should be a part of our game, ever.
Yeah, and just to make a clear example of the potential competitive problem you can have here, Cloud9 and Fnatic going into a best-of-5 final. They know they're going to have to play most maps in the game. Fnatic can go back and watch Cloud9's point-of-view demos and get very specific feedback on what Cloud9 does, how they operate in each map. Cloud9 can't do that to Fnatic. They can't. They don't speak Swedish. They cannot go back and analyze their games the same way. It is a marked competitive advantage for a team who can take advantage of the language barrier versus those who cannot. So it's a problem just competitively, minus the issues you're talking about. I actually looked to MLG, of all organizations, and Call of Duty, of all games. They have select snippets of in-game voice comm they take from games, and they broadcast that during the game to kind of give players, or give fans, a window into the players' discussion and the players' discourse during the course of the game. They're actually going to have lights that come on in the booth, so like between rounds, so players know, okay, this round you might have your voice comms taken into our broadcast to our audience. I think if you have to do this, and I understand wanting to do it because it is appealing to the fans. I understand that it's a business. I get that. I think that's a better way to go about it. You do it selectively, and you make sure it's clear to the players, okay, this next minute, for example, we might take some audio, so, just don't shit talk this next minute. I don't think it's a big problem to do that because it is an entertainment product. We can only do this because people are entertained by it. That's the reason why the game's played professionally. You can't be a burden to the players. You can't ruin the competitive integrity of the game while providing entertainment to the fans. So I think you have to find a middle ground here, and ESL, they didn't just look for middle ground, they went all the way. They just gave everything openly, and it obviously was a problem, as we both discussed here. But I don't want to, we spent plenty of time now on the problems and logistics of the tournament. Let's get into the games a little bit and the teams there. The final was a great one, which Cloud9 really were in a position to potentially win. They actually, in the games 3 and 4, which they lost, they were up 13-8 and 15-9 in those games. They were that close to taking the series 3-1 over Fnatic. Of course, close does not quite count. Fnatic proved very clutch, and Cloud9, I think, showed their nerves on the precipice of winning a big tournament they couldn't quite come through. Let's talk about the final for a bit here, with Fnatic proving to be still the best team in the world, a really good showing for them, and Cloud9 proving to be just that close.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be said, first of all, Cloud9 making the final. They did beat Envy in a best of 3, which is, of course, the sort of principal moment for them. We knew that, well, or rather I knew that I didn't see TSM doing anything in this tournament because they simply haven't been practicing. And were this not... was your inclusion not contingent on whether you or not you were going to be in the next season? I don't think TSM would have been there. I think they would have rather have had the break. So that really left Fnatic as the front runners, and the final proves that actually Cloud9 were capable of giving them a hell of a game. Now, the problem that you had at this juncture was you definitely saw the best and the worst of Cloud9. Cloud9 took a narrow win on Cobblestone. That was them at their best. They closed that game out. They were very impressive on both sides of the map. They get crushed on Cache, the map that Cloud9 professed to be one of their better maps. Fair enough. Fnatic just out-aimed them. But on Overpass, in particular, that's a map that they should never lose. They should never lose that map. They were in pole position. There were little embarrassing moments like the Molotov incident where 3 of them just got burnt alive, trying to do the defuse, right, rather than just saving the guns. You know, they didn't have enough time, so fair enough. But just save the guns then. But they didn't. That could have changed the outcome of the round. That was a little embarrassing moment for them, and they threw away some fairly key rounds, made some really poor mistakes on Overpass to sort of choke. Dust 2, 15-11 up, all the money in the world, all the time to play with, and you could just see it was just weighing on them. They made some very uncharacteristic mistakes, some very uncharacteristic rotations. Their communication started to falter, and ultimately, it's got to be said, I think a little bit of nerves got to some of the players. Freakazoid, I thought, especially on Dust 2, was really, really poor. And, you know, if you're going to say Sean Gares shouldn't be fragging because he's the in-game leader, and that's fine, then your entry fragger has to do something. And Freakazoid was really absent on Dust 2. Now, what was interesting was, if you watch the videos, you saw Shroud, who was going God mode on Dust 2, and had upwards of, had over 30 frags, actually. He got really angry and agitated with his teammates, which prompted Cajun B to call him out on Twitter about it, saying you need to fix your attitude. And this has been a feature of Shroud in the past. People have said he's a great individual player, but he doesn't really understand team dynamics and things like that.
Right.
But ultimately, if I were him, I'd be upset as well, because Freakazoid, you'd had a great tournament up until the final. He kind of did let the side down a little bit. But, great tournaments for Shroud and Skadoodle. Fnatic show that they've just got a mental strength now to go with all of the other assets in the team. Because, again, this wasn't vintage Fnatic. This wasn't a polished, all-conquering Fnatic. This was a Fnatic that was tetchy, bitchy, complaining about the heat, struggling, grinding out 16, 14 wins. But this is what champions do. They win when they're at their worst. So it's a narrow miss for Cloud9. They're hugely improved. They can feel really confident about their next tournament. Great of them to make a final. But ultimately, Fnatic show why they're the #1 team in the world, and will be for some time, I think.
Yeah, perhaps we'll see more teams next time around adopt the tank tops to deal with the heat a little bit better. Perhaps Cloud9 had a competitive advantage going with the tank tops.
They might have done. It actually reminds me a little bit of just in football. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there was a World Cup where Cameroon created these skin-tight, sleeveless tops. And I think it was for the African Cup of Nations, actually. Anyway, they created these skin-tight, sleeveless tops that were made out of a very special kind of Gore-Tex or whatever for improved ventilation. And they were deemed illegal because they did give them a competitive edge over the opponents who had to use regular footballing attire, and they were quickly pulled. So just goes to show, sometimes what you wear can make a difference.
Yeah, it gives you better arm movement, perhaps. I think Freakazoid in particular needs it. For those.
Definitely.
He and Pasha, perhaps Pasha would take a note from them. I don't know if the Polish cold allows for much tank top wearing. Could be nice this time of year, actually. I'm not sure. my limited knowledge of Polish climates exposed on the loadout. I apologize. What else from the event? One thing I saw, Envy, of course, really struggling against Cloud9 right after winning Gfinity, where they swept NIP in the final and looked solid. Envy obviously has some, let's say, consistency issues here. They shouldn't be swinging that dramatically back and forth between results. What do you see as a problem for this team who, again, ever since they kind of had that 1A and 1B spot with Fnatic months ago, like in the end of last year into the beginning of this year, they won X Games. That was kind of the peak of their top play there for a while. They've just been very inconsistent. They can win an event like Gfinity, then they can come here and really disappoint. What sticks out to you as the reason for their fall from being 1A, 1B with Fnatic to being just a top team who really struggle with their consistency?
So quite simply, with Envious, the problem is that one that, and again, it can't go away or you fundamentally change what they're about, and that is discipline. Now, we know these players have all struggled for discipline in the past, in particular Shox. Shox doesn't want to feel like being a professional player is a job. Now, you can argue about the virtues of that. Personally, I think it's a very Gallic sentiment to want to take joy in what you do for a living and to want it never to feel like an imposition. That, to me, is you know, it's classically French. You know, you think about all the great, you know, painters and writers and poets and artists and filmmakers that country has produced, their contribution to art. And it's the same, actually, in, you know, they've produced lots of athletes and sporting icons that are like that. Cantona, for example, he was never the fittest. He never practiced the hardest. But he was, of course, this enigmatic presence, an enigmatic player, a footballing genius, and a born leader. He retired early and went to play beach football when he actually probably could have carried on playing competitively for some time. And he fancied himself as an actor, and he went and made some films. He didn't want it to become his job. Same with David Ginola, somebody I know well from my time as a suffering Newcastle supporter. This was a guy who, when we bought him from Paris Saint-Germain, when we were scouting Georges Weah, and we bought him for 2.75 million, I believe it was an absolute steal. But everybody in France was like, you know, we don't know if he's going to work. We don't know if he's ever going to put the effort in. You know, he was quite a prolific wine drinker, alleged to smoke 40 cigarettes a day. But what a genius with a football. Just one of the greatest foreign imports in the modern game, if you're a Newcastle or Tottenham fan. Now, with Envious, there is this sentiment that seems to be at the core. I remember when Hastro first invested in the team, and he said on the first night, like between games, he goes, they put a bottle of Jack Daniels down, started drinking, partying, and I was like, this is in the middle of a tournament. And they were like, yeah, but don't worry. This is just how we do. Don't interfere with that, because this is how we need to be. So he sort of let it go and let it slide. And that was back when Envious were winning. That was back when Envious were getting to finals, were winning titles. Now it seems that they're still leading this similar lifestyle. Several people at Cologne said that Envious were out drinking till the small hours the night before the Cloud9 game. And, you know, I think if you do it and you win, you can justify the rules not applying to you. I think if you do it and you lose, you need to revise what you're doing. And I think at this point, with them having gone quite so long without really putting in their best level of performance at a sizable tournament, all due respect to the most recent Gfinity that they won, I don't know if Hastro will get involved and maybe we'll be like, look, guys, we need to just tone it down a little bit. But those players, as I said, they don't want it. They want to win, but they want it to be fun. It's something I can understand, because the last thing you want to do is fall out of love with the game. You don't want to wake up every day, put 10 hours practicing, and just hate your life and just be miserable because you're not enjoying it. There is no fun to be had. It's early bedtimes. I totally get that. But equally, I think if we want this to be a professional sport, you know, it's all fine and dandy if you want to be the George Best of Counter-Strike, but George Best won tournament. George Best carried games. That's the thing.
Right. There's some middle ground, perhaps, between the StarCraft Pro and the drink till 4 in the morning before the semifinal Pro.
Yeah, well, yeah and no. Maybe there is some middle ground. I mean, look, I'm the wrong person to ask about that. If that middle ground exists, I never found it in my life. So, it's either sobriety or
absolute debauchery.
One more beer then.
Right.
What? It's Monday? Shit, so.
That's what you told me before I went on the air, actually.
Yeah.
That's what I heard from you.
So, yeah, exactly. Today, I'm having a nice cup of tea and relaxing. That's how it is. I'm an all or nothing kind of guy myself, so I maybe I can empathize to a degree that perhaps another pundit or analyst wouldn't.
Perhaps. Unique insight that only Sir Richard Lewis can provide in this very specific category.
Let's hear it for alcoholism.
Exactly, yeah. Well, your expertise knows few bounds, and this is not one of those boundaries, certainly not. So I was, again, excited to see the mix of results, again, not since 2006, not since, it's crazy, it's been so long now, 9 years ago. How we have aged, Richard. 9 years ago, I think we last had a truly international mix of results and just teams in the standings and teams swapping games and victories back and forth from America, South America, from Europe. Now we just need Asia back in the mix, get the Chinese team at ESWC if they can win a few games, perhaps, get Australians going again. A bright future, I think. I'm excited for it. The international aspect of Counter-Strike. Speaking of Australians, actually. So I think one of the things that helped North America was actually Keith Stars coming to the States because they helped kind of jumpstart the practice scene in North America. Renegades are coming as well. They have, however, announced that in the Face-Up final, which they qualified for, they won't be attending because they have to go to an ESL 1 Cologne qualifier instead. This, to me, is very disappointing. You have two of the biggest events of the year that a team cannot attend, especially a team from Australia who, they value each event that they can get to. Renegades, of course, should be able to get to more of them in the future because they're an organizational home and going to North America most likely. But still, a big problem, I think, and it's disappointing to me that we still have these kind of scheduling issues where ESL and FACEIT, two of the biggest organizations in running Counter-Strike leagues these days, can have this kind of miscommunication or just lack of communication as a whole. Your thoughts on this, on Renegades having to drop out of the FACEIT finals, again, a big tournament, and for them, one of the few biggest of the year, certainly, just to try to qualify for ESL Cologne.
Yeah, look, it's an unfortunate situation, and I'd like to come out and criticize ESL and whatnot, but the calendar's getting kind of full for CS:GO, and I think there would be something. There'd be something a little bit too far, where if you as ESL decided to move qualifiers for your major tournament to suit a competitor's tournament as well. It's a regional qualifier. It's one of those things where, look, clashes are inevitable, unfortunately, as things currently stand with CS:GO growing. I don't think ESL care that much, to be honest, about whether or not they overlap with competitors. But then again, I also know that they have tried to accommodate some of the bigger names. There were channels of communication open to them. Some people have felt that those channels of communication were maybe a little bit disingenuous, and I believe other companies are now just not engaging. I mean, I've often said, look, maybe the way forward is if you all can't get along and can't work out a global calendar, well, fuck it. Maybe we go back to actual war. And people have events that clash. Because I've seen this multiple times. And trust me, whenever it happens, people quickly realize dividing your market share is a bad idea. Yes. And everyone learns how to work together again. Yeah. Happened with MLG and DreamHack in StarCraft 2. Happened in Counter-Strike Source with Slap and DS Rack. And that was a really interesting story. They were two people that had been involved in a LAN cafe together, joint owners. The business relationship ended badly. They were suing each other. They created tournament organizing companies, LAN organizers, and then they overlapped on each other's weekend deliberately and kept increasing the prize money to try and attract the teams. What that did was it was basically a disaster. It really harmed the CSS scene. So people will learn that it's if you can't get along, the super cutthroat competitive nature will not yield the dividends that you're hoping for.
Right.
But ultimately, yeah, I think we need to accept there are going to be clashes from time to time. Sucks for Renegades. I'm genuinely sympathetic, but equally, I think they're making the better judgment call here, because if I was them, I know that I'm pretty much guaranteed I can get to that major for Cologne by doing it this way.
Right.
So and that means sticker money, I believe, because this is a Valve approved major. There's a lot of fiscal reasons to do this. There's a lot of market reach reasons to do it. I'm sure Face It aren't going to hold it against the team. They're not that kind of company. They'll be missed. They enhance any event they go to. But what's good for the organization, what's good for the team, is to get involved in this major in Cologne.
Right. So they will. That simple. Yeah, these things do happen. I think going back to '05, actually, we saw CPL, who once upon a time were the leader in Counter-Strike. They themselves got kind of smacked down. They decided to go head-to-head with ESWC, and I believe the second edition of, or perhaps third edition of that event, of the ESWC event. The problem being that ESWC offered over 3 times the prize pool of CPL, so every single team that could qualify went to ESWC. CPL Summer, the premier event in Counter-Strike to that point, had a shell. They had like no teams attend of any significance because every team that could qualify went to ESWC instead. So you will see these things shake out in their natural way if it comes to that. I don't want it to come to that, though. I don't want to have to skip out on some.
No, I'd rather it didn't. I agree. Yeah. I'd rather it didn't. But ultimately, you know, there's still a few. How should we put it? There's still a few not so sensible people pulling the strings on the direction for CS:GO, because people look at other games. They see League of Legends as a closed shop. They see Dota 2 as having plateaued. They don't see any other games on the horizon, with maybe the exception of Heroes of the Storm. CS:GO is the big cash cow right now. So people are going to want to be like, yeah, what can we do to get our shit going? So
I am shocked there are those in this industry who might have their minds in the wrong place.
Go figure.
Yeah, that is a real hit to me. Speaking of being shocked, some news came down over the weekend. You might have seen this, Richard, perhaps. That Meteos was not playing for Cloud9. Imagine that. One of the 2 stars of Cloud9, one of the premier teams in the West and really in the world of League of Legends for some time now. They've made their second big change. One came earlier than the year when Hai retired, I suppose. Initially retired, now he's now unretired, temporarily at least, to come back as Cloud9's jungler. Meteos stepping down. The way the story broke was very esports as well. We had on a TSM stream, Keith McBrief's stream, a discussion in the background in the TSM house between Bjergsen and I believe Wild Turtle about how they had just heard Meteos was leaving Cloud9 very suddenly and unexpectedly. And then we had on Sneaky's stream, live, him playing melancholy piano music in the background and explaining the issues with Cloud9, how they couldn't work together as a team, how without high shot calling they were headless fucking chickens. Just very, very sad and very emo, we should say. Not that, you know, I would imply that any of the Cloud9 guys look that way or have that kind of style going for them. So a very weird way for the story to break. And now Meteos, having said he plans to stick around in League as long as the team will have him, I think pretty much pushing himself out there as a free agent, saying, if anyone will have me, I'll play. And just wink, wink, you know, nudge, nudge. So here we are. Meteos looks to be a potential free agent. Huge shock. Your reactions?
Yeah. So I mean, look. Here's the realities about this move. I mean, first of all, a lot of the stuff that came out, a lot of the videos, I think everybody knows actually that there was quite a coordinated, disingenuous reaction to something that's been brewing for a while. I definitely think the decision to leave was sudden. The word on the street, according to all my little birds, as Varys might say, my favourite bald eunuch, apart from myself, those birds were saying that there was a late night, you know, after some scrims, it got a little bit tense, and Meteor simply couldn't handle it anymore, couldn't take it anymore. The environment in the team hadn't been good. It was actually a bit more than just shot calling that was going on. Now, of course, Meteos being a free agent is kind of technically not true. He is still under contract with Cloud9.
Right.
I believe Jack is quite keen to keep him within the organization, as you would be. This is America's premier jungler. This is a model professional, a fiercely intelligent guy, and will be, whichever team he was to go to, which of course would be a competitor to Cloud9, especially where they are in terms of league position, he's going to enhance that team. It seems right now, for whatever reason, the only team he can't enhance is Cloud9 itself. So I imagine the buyout fee on Meteos will be quite sizable. There will be few organizations that will be able to afford it. And I imagine Jack will be very careful about where he lets him go. Now, if you think about the conglomerate of teams, which is, of course, Cloud9, Team Liquid, sort of Gravity a little bit, but not officially, and, of course, TSM, who Cloud9 have had a long-standing sort of almost sisterhood relationship with. I think that those are the organizations where Jack will probably be thinking, well, in the interests of the group, maybe Meteos could go to one of them. They don't really need anyone. Certainly, it's, they've not made any great intimations. For me, it's got to be about CLG.
That is the word, yes.
Yeah, now Hotshot, of course, he will have already talked to Jack about this. Hotshot used to be in that little group, but not quite so much these days, for reasons pertaining behind the scenes. Again, I understand, for reasons pertaining to this whole Twitch GGA situation. He was meant to be part of the group to stand tall against that, and then he elected not to get involved. And some of the managers there sort of kind of felt this was a little bit of a betrayal, and that he wasn't in the clique anymore. So whether or not that'll affect the business decisions, whether Jack will be looking at CLG as a competitor and let Meteos go, that's another thing. What I will say is Jack is a model professional. He's not a petty man. He always looks at the bigger picture, and I think he'll want to do what's best by the player who's been a tremendous servant for the club. Certainly, I haven't been told that CLG Meteos is going to be official yet, but if I was CLG, I would break the bank to bring Meteos in. He's exactly what they need, in my opinion.
It looks that way. I mean, I think they improved the mid lane by adding a more dynamic player to that point. So where else can you improve CLG? Add a more dynamic jungler. Who fits that bill in North America? Could there be anyone better?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not only that, though. It's just in terms of, first of all, Meteos is a calm presence. He's unruffleable.
Yes.
If that is indeed a word, he cannot. He's so versatile in what he can do with team compositions and all that. He is just. I mean, like he's dynamic in ways that Xmithy isn't, and he's definitely somebody that they should be looking to at least make inquiries about. I'm also thinking about this sort of, now all the CLG fans are going back to the idea that protecting the double lift is the way forward, and indeed everyone's been saying that if you want to get the best out of CLG and you don't want them to have that mid-season malaise and them drop off.
Which they're having right now.
Yeah, exactly.
They're in the middle of it.
It's classically CLG, isn't
Yes.
it? That what they need to do is they need to bring in somebody that can... I mean, it either take the pressure off Double F's shoulders by being somebody that can carry a game, or to be somebody who is so tactically astute and so good in their application of how they can use champs to protect Double Lift or enhance Double Lift's ability. And, Meteos can do either of those things. So, I think it would be a really good fit if he could put up with the CLG Madhouse, which I'm sure Meteos can. So, the ball is very much in Hotshot's court right now.
Yeah, it seems like a good fit. I mean, again, this is a team already going through that mid-season struggle, and Meteos is someone who's not going to be affected in that way. The pressure's not going to get to him, I don't think. And even heard one of the problems for the jungle compared to the bottom lane for CLG is the lack of communication. Meteos is someone who will take in his own hands what he does in the jungle. He'll take care of it. You don't have to tell him when to gank. Meteos will tell you when he's ganking your lane, actually. So yeah. I think it could work. I think it makes sense. He's
one of those people who's a born leader, ultimately. Like, you get these in sports. Like, there'll be someone who wears a captain's armband, but then there'll be somebody who just is naturally a captain-type persona.
Right.
They don't need the armband or the title to exude that authority. Meteos is one of those.
Yeah, which would be helpful for CLG because I think they need that kind of presence. They have Double F2 who is very vocal about needing to be led. They have Aframu, a very quiet leader, let's say, more of a calming presence. Pobolto's not a leader. He's just a fun guy to be around. We'll see. I think it makes sense Whether it makes financial sense for the teams is a whole other question. Whether it makes financial sense for Cloud9, for Jack Etienne, is a whole other question. Whether it makes competitive sense for Jack and whether he feels the need to do that to let Meteos go to a big rival like CLG is a big question. You mentioned TSM, the sister team. I just want to throw this out there. You don't think that TSM's jungler is in any danger here?
Yeah, well, if he is, I mean, it would be absolutely criminal. I know Reginald has a reputation for being ruthless, but again, I don't see Santorin as some sort of ongoing problem for TSM. And I think, you know, while his performances maybe haven't hit that high level that we've seen in the past, you know, I still think, you know, they're joint top with Gravity. You don't need to start tearing that team apart. Not yet. And I definitely think if you were to do it, I'm not so sure I'd be starting with Santorin.
Yeah, when TSM, when they spoke to the players and said, hey, you guys need to improve your game, Santorin was not among them. It was Dyrus and Wild Turtle, so I would be surprised as well. Yeah. I do think it's
exactly. I mean,
go ahead.
I think Wild Turtle for the longest time has been an underperformer, somebody that's just been carried ultimately by the you know, to, which isn't to say he's bad. He's a great solo queue player. He's great mechanically, but he's got Lust Boy in his lane. The best support in NA for me. By some distance, a versatile player, a carry support, somebody that can really, you know, in team fights does so much work that probably goes unseen, but you know, to the untrained eye, just a phenomenal player. But like his laning is so unbelievably strong as well that you could put any AD carry in there. I mean, I'm so super sad actually because there was a genuine period of time where Forgiven to TSM could have probably happened. There was this small window of opportunity. If TSM had committed to the idea of getting rid of Wild Turtle just a little bit sooner, and Forgiven hadn't sort of committed the idea to wanting to stay in EU, like they just missed each other, like by maybe a window of 2 months or something. You know, that's a real shame because I think if you take just an incredible AD carry and you stick it in that team, I think they get really scary. And you know, don't get me wrong, they've made the change, and I do like Keith. But I think if Forgiven had gone there, and he was definitely in talks about moving to America, and CLG could have had him, if they wanted to bite the bullet and maybe replace Double Lift, which they did look at in the off season. So yeah, I mean that would have been scary. But yeah, Santorin's not the problem in that team. Yeah, Santorin's not the problem. I like Dyrus. I love the guy. I still think he's a phenomenal pro. He's one of the all-time greats in top lane. Yeah, he's not having the same impact on games that he used to. So, I think there's definitely other areas you look at before you even get to Santorin.
I would say so as well. It just speaks to Meteos' prowess that if you are a North American team, you're going to have questions about whether or not you should get Meteos because he's available, potentially, and he is of that caliber that it really doesn't matter who you have in your jungle, that it's going to be a question for your organization whether or not you should pick him up. So, we'll see how it goes.
Statistically, Santorin has been the stronger player by I think almost any metric.
Of course, Santorin's been playing with TSM while Meteos has had the new version of Cloud9 to play with.
But you know, obviously, yes, statistics are deceptive in that sense. But just saying, the idea that there's no guarantee that even with Meteos' pedigree, you put Meteos into TSM in place of Santorin and they get any better. I don't really see any quantitative or qualitative data to sort of make that a valid argument.
Right. I think the big names we look at here are TSM and CLG more likely, but I think Gravity also an interesting possibility because it's kind of surprised as a top of the table team. They have some dynamic players. Keen in the mid lane gets banned out almost every game because of his dynamism. Put Meteos in there, perhaps they may have a run at Worlds. We'll see. I don't know. It's interesting to see how this develops. I hope that he goes somewhere before Worlds. I don't want to see Meteos sit out of Worlds because of this Cloud9 situation that's developed. We'll end, Richard, you and I, with this wing. Cloud9 now, because we've talked about Meteos and what he's doing. What about Cloud9? Because this team, I mean, I called them this playoffs a few weeks ago, and I thought that was pretty bold at the time. I actually should have gone further than that. I should have said relegation because this team looked terrible. I mean, this past weekend they looked awful, lost to Team 8, just going down and down further. I mean, I don't know what to do about them, what they think they should do themselves, if they can even stay on the LCS. What do you see for this team in the coming months?
There's zero chance that they'll get relegated, in my
Okay.
opinion. Zero chance. I mean, keep in mind that automatic relegation is guaranteed for Team Dragon Knights.
Seems that way. Yes.
There's just, the visa problems and everything else have just ruined their season. They're going to be a curious footnote in the history of League of Legends. Ultimately, they're not going to they're not going to have any impact this season at all. And again, I think Cloud9 ninth at the moment. There's enemy Esports and Team 8 that they can very realistically leapfrog ahead. And Cloud9 definitely have the ability to beat big name teams, even without Meteors. I would go as far as to say. I can see them climbing out of that. They'll definitely finish at the higher end of the bottom part of the table.
We'll see.
But
I have less faith than you do. Again, they just lost to Team 8 unimpressively this weekend. But
yeah, I mean, again,
we'll see.
that is pretty much, that should have been a game that I think any other week they win.
Sure.
But with everything that's been going on internally, it's made for poor preparation. But let's be clear, this isn't a team that's falling apart at the seams in a very public fashion, like your MYMs, like your Copenhagen Wolves, right? Like your Team Mons. That isn't happening here. This is a team that's going through a transitional phase. It's an unprecedented poor run for one of the great teams in North America, one of the great orgs. But this was always going to happen. No roster stays together forever. They made a change. They now need to make another. And maybe even they need to make one or two more. Who knows how this is going to end up. But certainly, even during a transitional phase, there's enough talent, enough pedigree, and the players get enough support and the tools to be able to achieve to guarantee that they remain in the LCS. I think it's unthinkable that Cloud9 get relegated, and I won't have a bit of it until they are staring. If TDK go on a winning streak and Cloud9 continue to lose, then come and talk to me.
Well, we'll see. I may have to come talk to you about that in the coming weeks. We'll find out, Richard. We will. Thanks, as always, to one and only Sir Richard Lewis for joining us, as he does, and giving the insight only he can into ESL and